Good evening. My name is Alan Cedric Domingo, and today, on behalf of my teammates Kiana and James, I'm going to be presenting our team project proposal using techniques learned from Web Multimedia. This presentation was created for Kyung Jae Lee, professor of Web Multimedia taught at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and this project presentation was created for spring semester 2022. So first, I'm going to go over what our team project was about, what are we hoping to achieve, and what do we basically want to do with our project? Well, we endeavored to create an artillery-based game, which would be a turn-based game using both processing as well as data structure and algorithm design techniques that we've learned throughout the semester. About the game that we're looking to build, basically, we would like to create a game that has two players. It will be a turn-based game, and each players will take turns, essentially adjusting the angle as well as the power of their tank in order to shoot a ballistic trajectory. The goal of the game is to destroy the opponent's tank, and you do so by gaining victory by achieving a score of 25. The first player to reach 25 wins the game, and at which point the game will offer the player a chance to restart or to return to the main menu. Again, the main point of the game is having to estimate the trajectory of the missile or the projectile that the tank will be firing, as well as where it will fall, as your goal is to hit the enemy tank. Now, the game itself will feature several user interface components. This involves movement of the tank, as well as changing the angle at which the projectile is fired, and finally, also the power or the force behind the projectile as it is fired. That will determine how far the projectile will go, in addition to the angle. So how did we want our game to look? Well, we did have quite a bit of inspiration from existing games out there, which we'll cover in a minute. But first, we'd like to show you our game. So essentially, you'll have 6 main scenes within the game, and these also correspond to the different states that the game will encounter. And we'll go over that as we talk about how we will implement the finite state machine and what references will follow. But essentially, you'll have the game intro, which will appear at the start, and the game intro will just introduce our game's narrative. Once the game intro has loaded, the game will take you to the main menu. Again, you'll see that as of right now, we have not yet decided on an official game title, though that is just a placeholder and we should have a logo or our game name there. There's also a couple of buttons, including New Game, Credits, and Exit, in which the user can interact with. If the user elects to start a new game, you can see on the third scene, start a new game, basically our user interface. So we'll have buttons to adjust both the power and angle. Additionally, we thought that we can just move the tanks using the arrow keys, while the power and angle would be adjusted by clicking the actual buttons themselves. You've also got the score at the top of the screen. And if you look at the fourth scene, which is actual gameplay, you'll see that the score would be adjusted for each time the tank hits a direct hit against the enemy tank. Again, you can see here that the score has been updated, and you can see the trajectory of the projectile being fired. Again, we'll also have the option to pause the game, at which point the user will be given 2 buttons, either to resume or to exit back to the main menu. And finally, once one of the players has reached 25, it indicates that the enemy tank has been destroyed. That player is deemed the winner, and at that point, the user is invited to start a new game or to return to the main menu. Now, finally, we wanted to go over what we referenced, including research as well as the images and links of that research. So again, as we mentioned earlier, we'd like to create an artillery-based game. Now, this is actually a very common genre. It's one of the older genres of video games, and essentially it's just a multiplayer game in which tanks are trying to destroy each other. Generally, for these games, there's adjustable angles, power, and movement, and essentially, generally the main goal is the same. You would like to hit the enemy tank. And just a fun fact that we'd like to mention, artillery games are one of the oldest computer games developed. Reason being, one of the first computers were actually created to fire rockets and to calculate the trajectories of those rockets. If you actually look I believe it was in 1938 that they actually created a computer to calculate the trajectory of torpedoes being fired by submarines. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there are already quite a few existing games, namely Gunbound as well as Pocket Tanks, two games that both myself as well as my group mates have played in our early childhood. And again, although they might look different and each game has their own niche features, essentially at the end of the day, it's still a very similar concept to each other. And finally, we do have the research as well as resources in order to support our project. Things that this includes, including implementing a finite state machine within our system, using push matrix and pop matrix to implement movement, as well as developing an algorithm to calculate the tank's projectile trajectory, which will be have to be researched additionally. But we do have resources available for each of the three. So again, to implement the FSM, the finite state machine, we do have lecture notes from our professor's other course, which is our software quality assurance course. In addition, we also have the references available on the processing website to assist with moving our characters on and off the screen. So that would include push matrix, pop matrix, as well as translate and rotate. All of the references for that are available on the processing.org website for us to use. And finally, we're going to have to develop a way to calculate the tank's projectile trajectory. Again, there are plenty of references out there. One that I've included is actually just a link about how we can actually create a formula based off of angle and power to estimate a trajectory of a projectile. Again, in summary, this is our course presentation for our artillery-based game, which we will be producing for our term project for Web Multimedia. We'd like to thank our professor, Mr. KJ Lee, for his guidance. And again, we look forward to any feedback. Thanks again. Take care.